Good evening, how are you?
Good.
Good. My name is Pat Roy, and I'm glad to be with you here tonight. Our little family ministry is called Creation Quest, but I used to work at the Institute for Creation Research as their media producer long ago. I worked with Genesis Apologetics, and it was kind of cool. I noticed that you guys were running a bunch of Genesis Apologetics videos, so we've worked with those. Our family ministry, we go out and speak. And we also do homeschool classes in Lynchburg. We call them the Creation Worldview classes. And there's 3 modules of 10 classes. So kids, we're doing kind of similar to what you guys are doing. Kids go through 30 weeks of classes. And so we teach everything with that. And then the other thing we do is we've got a ministry that we started just a couple of years ago called the Creation Experience. And that's been fun. I teamed up with another friend who's also a media producer in the creation movement. And we came up with this crazy idea of a lot of times people go out with PowerPoints and speak on creation, which is not a problem. God's changed a lot of lives that way. But what we did is we said, wouldn't it be cool to kind of do something crazy? And so we started talking about it, and we kind of came up with this crazy presentation we call the Creation Experience. He takes me, and he puts me in a bag, and he ties me up, and he throws me into a trunk, and he locks the trunk and puts chains over it, and then he jumps on top, and he lifts a blanket, and when he drops it, I'm standing there instead of him. And then, of course, he's locked in the trunk. We blow hydrogen up on the stage. At one point, people pull stuff out from under their seats, and they do an experiment. We've got a game show that takes place. We have a cell phone competition. We use comedy and a bunch of other stuff, and we wrap it all into a 90-minute presentation that we call the Creation Experience.
Lead me, guide me. Let me walk in the works because you love me. You have great purpose for my life. And I'm going to make a difference, not for me, but for you and your kingdom.
So we got to do that in a couple places in West Virginia this last week on our way to get here. So we kind of took a long route to get here. We left 5 days ago to get here. So it's been a long journey. So anyway, it's been a lot of fun, and we're really enjoying that. And I think people just enjoy having an immersive experience rather than somebody just talking at them. But anyway, tonight, yeah, I'm just talking to you guys. So anyway, could we start by just praying? Would that be okay? Dear Father, I thank you so much for this chance to come and talk about Novarupta. And Father, I thank you for each person that's here. And God, I just pray that you help me to do my best tonight, and that you help me to be passionate. And Father, I pray for all of us that we would just have a great time of fellowship. And Father, thank you for everybody here at the center that is working so hard to reach so many people. And Father, I thank you that you have raised them up. And Father, we thank you for all the stories that we've heard already of classes and visitors coming through, and the museum, and just the schools and everything. Father, I pray that you would continue to expand their ministry, and that you would continue to use them in powerful ways in this area, Father. I just pray these things in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right, so one of the things I like to share with audiences is why I'm passionate about this. You know, I started the creation movement when I was a young man, and here it is all these years later, and I'm no less passionate than I was. And I've been blessed. I've gotten to live my whole life full-time creation ministry, and God has just been so good to us, huh, Sandy? And it's been a total adventure. I think when you serve God with your whole heart, it is total adventure. I feel sorry for Christians who think that it's about sitting on a pew, right? It's kind of sad. But when you actually live for the Lord, He takes you on an adventure. So you guys have probably heard the statistic that most young people reject their faith by the time they're done with college. Wow. Most students will reject their faith by the time they're done with college. That's a horrible statistic. I don't know about you, but I hate that statistic. In fact, I hate it so much that I would go out on college campuses all the time to see if it was true. Okay, so when it comes to creation versus evolution, which would you say that you believe the most?
That's actually a really good question, because I'm at a point in my life where I was raised in like a Christian family and church and stuff, and raised to be essentially a creationist, the traditional Christian family. But studies, the more I lose faith in what I previously held in. So I want to go as far as saying I'm a atheist now, but I am losing more and more faith in my previously held creationist beliefs.
Cool. Were you guys raised in a Christian home?
Yes, we were.
Yes, I was.
Yes, definitely.
I was actually.
Yeah, that's true.
So I went to church for up until around like 8 years old.
Yes,
So when it comes to the whole creation evolution debate, which would you say that you believe the most?
definitely creation.
Evolution.
Well, I'm actually a biology student, so I have to kind of believe in the evolution part.
I would believe in evolution the most.
I believe in evolution. I'm more of a science guy.
To me, evolution makes sense because of the education that I've gone growing up. But traditionally, as a family, I've been raised to believe in creation.
Evolution, 100%.
Evolution.
And what convinced you that evolution was true? What was the most convincing thing for you?
Just science, everything that I learned in school.
Just what school has taught me, I kind of believe that. I believe the universe was created as the Bible said, and then my personal belief is that the creator stepped back and let evolution take place.
Well, I'm a computer scientist, so I kind of really believe in science, and so yeah, it's the evidence.
I think a lot of people these days want to base their knowings and beliefs off of something, physical evidence.
Just seeing the evolution in bones and with apes and to humans, just seeing that whole evolutionary change.
Basically, the teachings in public schools, what I was brought up learning, what I looked up on the internet. It's actually a big passion of mine to kind of spread the word, and I believe people shouldn't live in ignorance, and that's what I think creationism is.
Ouch! Amazing, right? So, boy, I went to a lot of different campuses for a few years there and talked to a lot of students. Almost all of them have rejected their faith. Okay, so you're only seeing the stuff that we kept together for the video, right? I'm going to give you the behind the scenes. So I would show up, and what I would say, first question is, do you believe in creation evolution? Or did you come from a Christian home? About half the students would say yes. Okay, so I'm going to talk about just those students right now. Next question I asked them was, how long did it take to reject your faith? 3 to 6 months. Wait a minute, you were raised in a Christian home your whole life, and you rejected your faith in 3 to 6 months? Next question, what was it that convinced you that there was no God? Okay? So you heard the one girl say that it was a transition from an ape-like creature to humans, right, that convinced her. Just about every other student I talked to said, I don't know. Wait a minute, you were raised your whole life in a Christian home, you rejected your faith in 3 to 6 months, and you don't know why? Next question, did anybody ever tell you the scientific case for creation? All of them said no, that had rejected their faith. Now, you saw the one Christian couple that was there, that was cute. They were still following their faith. And you saw the guy at the start, right? He said, I feel like my creationist beliefs are starting to fail me. Right? By the way, I've got to say that we turned off the cameras and probably spent about 45 minutes with all the different students, just sharing with them. That particular guy, I talked to him for 45 minutes, and then he had to go take a test. And then he came back and we spent 45 more minutes with him. And at the end he said, I think I've been wrong, I need to get back to it again. So every time I see him on the screen, I pray for him, all right? But every other student that had rejected their faith said that nobody had ever told them that there was scientific evidence for their faith. Whoa. Next question. Do you want to hear the scientific case for creation? 100% of the students said, what do you guys think? We got 2 choices. Yes. Maybe. It's a solid, definite 100% maybe. No, every single one of them said yes. So it's really cool. Like I said, we got to turn off the cameras and talk to them. So think about this. Probably about 90% of Christian families send their kids off to secular colleges, right? Maybe 90%. They reject their faith in 3 to 6 months. There's not really any reason that they do. They never heard the scientific case for creation. The ones who did seem to be sticking with it. And all of them wanted to hear the scientific case for creation. Wow, that's powerful. So that's what gets me passionate about this, is that I think the creation message, more than just about any other message, is life-changing. I think when you take young people and show them that the science is in harmony with God's word, it turns wimpy Christians into powerful Christians, because they're like, whoa, this is true. And for non-believers, isn't it cool when you ask questions and they can't answer them, and it kind of burns a hole in their brain because they realize that their worldview doesn't line up with reality, right? So that's why I'm passionate about the whole creation message. Anyway, thanks for letting me share that with you. I know you guys are in the same boat, right? A lot of you, how many of you are actually working here at the center in some form? Okay, so like in some form, or have given blood already for this. Okay, let's go on. Praise God for what you guys are doing. That's awesome. So Sandy and I got to work with a center kind of similar to this at the base of Mount Saint Helens, not right at the base, but a little bit away from Mount Saint Helens, the Mount Saint Helens Creation Center. I got to be the director there. And Mount Saint Helens is so cool because in 1980, this is what happened.
A magnitude 5.1 earthquake causes the north face of the mountain to collapse, triggering the largest landslide in recorded history. Pressure rising from deep within the volcano rips open the mountainside, toppling entire forests, scorching everything in its path.
Wow, Mount St. Helens was incredible. The damage it did, it's just amazing. Everything that took place with the layering that took place. Let's start again. But here's my question is, what if there was a volcano 30 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens? There is. And guess what? Hardly anyone in the creation movement knows about it. How many of you here have studied Novarupta? There you go. You know what? I travel around the nation and I get the same thing. I even go to all these creation clubs where you've got the people that are like the creation, like they've read and talked about everything creation, and nobody knows about Novarupta. And so tonight, I'm going to be giving you information that most creationists haven't seen. So that's kind of an exciting thing. By the way, if you sign up on the sheet here, I'm going to keep you up with a project that we're going to work on. And then the email that I think you guys sent out, thank you for sending that out. I offered that I'll give you guys a digital download when it becomes available, so make sure to put your name on the sheet, and I'll follow through on my part to get that to you. So, Pat, who are you? You're just a creation media guy. Why are you talking about Novarupta? Well, one of the guys who's done some expeditions to Novarupta came to us 10 years ago and said, I would love for you guys to produce a documentary on this volcano. And then through some lost intellectual property for a while and a bunch of other things that took place, we never got around to it. But we are just about to finish this project. So some of the things that you're going to see tonight, you will be the first audience to see these things, a lot of them. And then hopefully in about 2 or 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, hopefully, we'll release this. I told Dave when he first called me, this is so cool because I wanted to show up tonight with actual DVDs, but we're not able to do that. So it's called A Journey to Novarupta, and I just thought I'd play a little trailer for you so you get to see this documentary that'll be coming out, and it's kind of cool. Institute for Creation Research has already said that they're going to pick it up. It sounds like AIG may pick it up as well, so hopefully you'll hear about the documentary when it comes out here pretty soon.
Today I saw a sight no human being has ever laid eyes on. A region in the great Alaskan wilderness, laid bare by a volcanic eruption. The utter devastation will make further exploration difficult. My team and I are running low on supplies. This evening I have left base camp alone to do some scouting. I have not seen an animal or any living creature since entering the blast zone. Tomorrow we hope to send an expedition out from the base camp to find Novarupta. I'm overwhelmed by the amazing power of one volcano to completely change the entire landscape. We've pitched our tent away from the danger of avalanche from the rocks rolling off the mountains around us. This is such a harsh environment. I know danger is a constant concern, but we're determined to press on. I hope the words on the pages of this journal inspire future generations to explore this amazing place.
Some adventures are inspired by fame or fortune, and some by the pursuit of knowledge. But I've had the privilege of following in the footsteps of a man whose discoveries show the glory of the Creator. My name is Kenny Cole, and this is my story.
There you go. So after tonight, you're going to know more than just about anybody in the creation movement about this amazing volcano. And then hopefully everybody will know about it soon, is what I'm hoping. So some really awesome stuff. So June 1st, 1912, earthquakes were starting to rock a little Indian village in the Alaskan Peninsula. And surrounding hundreds of miles, there was just this huge sound of mostly unpopulated villages and just these huge sounds and rumbling, and soon families were fleeing for their lives. Late in the evening of the 5th of June, observers at Cold Bay, which were 40 miles away, they noted that the sky looked black and that something was taking place. And again, this is a map, and I don't know if you've seen Mount Katmai. You know the pictures of the fish jumping into the bear's mouth? That's where Mount Katmai is, and something big was about to take place.
First of all, I will let you know of our unlucky voyage. I do not know whether we shall be either alive or well. We are awaiting death at any moment. Of course, do not be alarmed. A mountain has burst near here, so that we are covered in ash, in some places 10 feet and 6 feet deep. All this began on the 6th of June. Night and day we light lamps. We cannot see daylight. In a word, it is terrible, and we are expecting death at any moment. And we have no water. All the rivers are covered in ash, just ashes mixed with water. Here are darkness, hell, and thunder, and noise. I do not know whether it is day or night. Vanka will tell you all about it. So kissing and blessing you both. Goodbye. Forgive me. Perhaps we shall see each other again. God is merciful. Pray for us.
So that was an actual letter from a guy named Ivan, who was a native fisherman that was there. The people of the area did not know what was going on. The sky was black. Sounds were coming from everywhere. Many of them thought that they were going to die, and they didn't know why. Matter of fact, 500 people boarded a ship and went out into the bay and stood in the boat for, I think it was 3 days, just like that, in the boat trying to escape death. So a lot of them were thinking about Pompeii, and they were worried that something was going to be happening. But imagine on that ship in total darkness during the night, just standing there for 3 days to try and escape destruction. The sound of the eruption traveled all the way to Juneau, which was 750 miles away. It took the sound wave an hour to get there. Isn't that cool? That was such a powerful sound wave that's how long it took. You can see some of the ash and stuff that was built up as a result of that. These villages that were all around Katmai were just absolutely devastated. And nobody knew what had gone on because the volcano was so remote that nobody really knew where this had come from. Where did this eruption take place? Many of them thought it was maybe Mount Katmai, which is in the area, but they were not sure. And it sat desolate with nobody investigating it until just a couple of years later. They sent in a guy for the National Geographic, and his name was Dr. Robert Griggs. And Dr. Robert Griggs actually led 3 different expeditions to the site. He was a Christian man. He's actually from Ohio. So he was out studying kelp along the coast there in the Katmai area. He was studying kelp when the eruption took place. And so he always wondered what would happen after a volcanic eruption like that. And he wanted to go in and study the plant biology. He ended up with funding from National Geographic and a team. And so they went out and documented all of this. You can see that there's some of the people that are going along. Now, it was an incredible adventure. By the way, tonight I'm going to talk to you about adventure and action. And I know you get this all the time in creation meetings. I'm even going to share a little romance with you tonight, all right? So I'm promising everything for you as I tell the stories, and that's basically what I'm going to do. Well, Griggs and his team, they faced quicksand, they faced high winds, pumice storms, if you can imagine pumice just hailing against your face and just ripping off skin and ripping your clothes and all of that type of stuff. They had rivers that they had to get across, and because of the eruption, as they're crossing the river, they don't know if there's dropouts, right? So at any moment, as they're going along, they could drop down and then the river would just sweep them away forever. There was one night, well, I'll tell you that story in just a little bit, but it is amazing the action and the adventure that these guys had to go through. Here you can see them on one of their adventures. That's actual footage of them on their adventure. Here's Dr. Griggs himself crossing through some quicksand, and so they oftentimes came across quicksand. Now, during the 1916 expedition, Griggs and Folsom, which is one of the guys that was with him, they were in their little base camp, and they were there with Church. So it was the 3 of them. It was Griggs and Folsom and Church, and they had pancakes for breakfast, and the Church ate way too many pancakes. And so when it came time to go out for that day and explore, they left him behind because he was just sitting in the tent going, oh, I shouldn't have had so many. So Griggs and Folsom are out, and as they're out exploring, they're going along, and all of a sudden they saw a little fumarole in the distance. And so they went and they walked over because they wanted to check it out, and they also wanted to warm their hands. And as they were warming their hands, they noticed more fumaroles, and then eventually they climbed up a ridge and they discovered something that became one of the most amazing discoveries that they made. I'm sorry, I'm an audio drama producer, so I've got to throw a little audio drama producing into here as well. So.
Should we proceed further, Griggs? Church is probably wondering if we've been dispatched. Poor Church, incapacitated by too many pancakes.
At least we had someone to stay back and watch our gear.
I must say that I've been utterly surprised by the lack of volcanic activity that I thought would be manifesting itself in such short order after such a grand eruption.
I would agree, Folsom. Okay, I think we need to get back to where Church is waiting.
All right. The steam we thought we were pursuing has shown itself to be nothing more than clouds.
Wait! Folsom, what do you see down there in the floor of the pass?
What appears to be a miniature volcano jetting steam.
Binoculars reveal that you are correct.
What do we do now?
I feel we owe it to Church to turn back. We'll return with him. Okay, follow me back.
Yes, sir. What's wrong, sir?
When I turned back at you, I couldn't help but stare down the valley. Look!
More steam!
I know Church is waiting for us, but he can wait a little longer. Folsom, follow me. Oh, wow! Folsom, look what we've discovered.
The valley's dotted with hundreds.
There's 1,000. fumaroles. It looks as if all the steam engines of the world have been assembled together and have popped their safety valves at once and are letting off a surplus of steam in concert.
Griggs, we need to get down there and have a closer look. Let's go.
Now, as he wrote in his journal that night, he couldn't sleep, and you heard part of his quote there. Here's what Dr. Griggs said. The whole valley, as far as the eye could reach, was full of hundreds. No, thousands. Literally tens of thousands of smokes curling up from its fissured floor. The first glance was enough to assure us that we had stumbled upon another Yellowstone park, unseen and unsuspected by white man and native alike until this hour. I tried to keep my head and observed carefully, yet I exposed two films from one precious roll and tried for pictures that I should have known were impossible. It was as though all the steam engines in the world assembled together had popped their safety valves at once and were letting off surplus steam in concert. They couldn't believe what they saw, just this valley of smokes where it was all this volcanic action that was taking place. Okay, so here's some cool images, and oops, sorry, clicker problems. It's actually moved, but guess it's not. Okay, so there we go. Checking out some of the volcanic. Oh, there we go. Look at that. Isn't that just cool looking? Okay, here they are measuring the temperature of some of the fumaroles. Okay, you guys ready for your first look at Novarupta? Okay, so this is a picture taken by Dr. Griggs' team. By the way, when I first started working on this project, right, you're going to do a documentary about a volcano. You want this amazing volcano, right? Just this majestic, blown-out peak, right? So when I first saw the pictures of Novarupta, I contacted the explorer that I've been working with, and I said, okay, I got this picture, but where's the picture of the volcano? He went, no, actually, that is the volcano. Okay, so here's your first look at Novarupta. We'll talk about why it looks like that. So there's the actual dome itself. So yeah, you can see, there's the lava dome right here, and then that's the ring around it. Here's one of the team members with his wife, can you believe that? Out there in this incredible wilderness on these expeditions. Here's a base camp. Now, one of the nights that they were at base camp, they were all set up, and the wind started blowing harder and harder and harder, and pretty soon it was starting to tumble their equipment and starting to rip apart their tents. Matter of fact, the pumice was hitting the tents so much that it was just ripping them to shreds. And finally they realized in the middle of the night that they had to abandon camp. And so they all went running out of their tents, covering themselves, and just running down the valley. And as that happened, the strong gust of wind came and literally picked Griggs up into the air, carried him down the valley, and then dropped him off in some soft pumice so he lived to tell the story about that. Can you imagine just being carried by wind down this valley? So it's incredible. So that's camp before, camp after. All right, so when you're out in the wilderness like that, exploring a bunch of different fumaroles, how do you cook your food? On a fumarole, of course. So there they are, actually cooking their meals. Okay, we're going to talk about this more later, but they came across this amazing canyon that had been carved. And basically, and I'll probably tell you more about this later, during the eruption, there were 3 different mountains that literally slid off of themselves. And in doing that, it created a dam, and then a bunch of water backed up behind the dam. You guys ever heard a story like this before? And then the dam breached, and then the water came through and cut this huge canyon that was there. Griggs' team got there right after that had happened. Okay, so they were there to see the after effects of this flood. Basically what he said is, I found the countryside ravaged by a great flood whose waters were just subsiding. So he was there right after that took place. So you can see some of the pictures. Trees were snapped off near ground level for several miles by the violent impact of the water. A fan of huge boulders were deposited by the mouth of the canyon, and the volume of water was so great that it flooded the valley to a depth of approximately 10 feet. So there you go, you've got a breached dam creating a huge canyon very quickly. So they led all of these expeditions, and the president, whose name was Gilbert Grosvenor, was was extremely proud of what they did and actually gave them accommodations for all of
Every
them.
member of the organization may thus derive considerable satisfaction that he or she has assisted to bring about such important additions to our knowledge of the young and active planet upon which we live.
Look what he said, young and active planet. Wow, from National Geographic. Wow. So anyway, the team was awarded with all kinds of different accolades and that type of stuff. And then Griggs went on to write a book, and he wrote his book called The Valley of 10,000 Smokes. And in that book, it's kind of cool. He tells about all of the adventures they've taken, and he's got all kinds of pictures and all kinds of information about all of the different things that they discovered upon their expeditions. And that's the book that he compiled that all into. And are you guys ready to do a little bit of time travel with me? We're going to travel 100 years into the future. There we go. Here's a man by the name of Dr. David Shorman. He's the guy that I've been working with. Oops, I don't know why that's changing. He has a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace Engineering. He's got a Master of Science in Marine Chemistry, a PhD in Limnology, and he's the founder of Dive Interactive Education. Basically, Dr. Shorman would work with homeschoolers on field trips, taking them out into nature and teaching homeschoolers about creation through nature. Have you guys ever thought about doing that before? So one of the ways he would do that is he would take them fishing up in Alaska, and while in Alaska, they would study the salmon and design of salmon and the salmon migration, and then they would study about the different rocks and trees that were out there, and they would go on these incredible raft trips. And one time while he was out there, he came across the lodge that's up there near Katmai, and inside that lodge, he found a book that was written 100 years ago by Dr. Griggs. And so it's kind of cool. Here's this book that had been written 100 years ago, and Dr. Shorman started reading through it, and he said, this has got huge creationist implications. And so as he started thinking about it, he said, I'm going to do exactly what Dr. Griggs did. I'm going to assemble a team of explorers, and we're going to go out and explore this volcano, and we're going to do it specifically with the goal of teaching about creation. And so he put together a team of people. This is his stepson, Kenny, right here. That's Joel, that's Mike, and his son, John, and this is Tommy. And so these young men had done a lot of expeditions together, and so that's the team that he assembled to put together. And now they actually flew out, and the way it worked out is there was a scheduling problem, so Dr. Shorman and Kenny were going ahead of the others by 1 day. And so basically they flew to Katmai Park, and again, the only way you can get to Katmai National Park is by float plane, and then they broke up into the two teams. And again, I told you how there was the bears that were there, right? You recognize kind of that picture? So if you go there, I guess there's just constantly bear catching salmon nonstop. So it's pretty cool if you're a bear, kind of lousy if you're a salmon, I guess. So anyway, going to this place, you can see how lush it is, right? You can see just how beautiful it is. And then you get out to this particular point, and all of a sudden there's just this boundary, and then all of a sudden all of the trees and all of the life stops, and then it's just volcanic material. And there's nothing really living there at all. There's not really insects or birds or any kind of animals. And usually what happens is tourists go and they see the bears, and then they head over to the visitor center that's close to that, and then they look out over the wilderness, and then all of a sudden there's Dr. Shorman and his son Kenny putting on their backpacks, and everybody's like, what are these guys doing? And they actually headed out into the wilderness to make their way towards Novarupta. The first night they made it to a place called the Buttress Mountains. Their goal was to get to some USGS cabins, I'll show you some pictures of those, closer to Novarupta. And so here they are spending their first night at the Buttress Mountain Range. Now what's interesting is you can see that they put some electrified fence around their tent, and later Dr. Shorman told me how ridiculous that seemed because there's literally nothing out there, so there was nothing really to protect themselves from. So kind of interesting. Here they are crossing one of the rivers. Now I told you that those rivers drop off sometimes, so you can see that Kenny's actually using the stick. And the reason he's using the stick is he wants to make sure that there's not a drop off, because if there was a drop off, he could just get swept down the river. Now this one's not moving that fast, but there's some rivers that they cross where the water was moving pretty quickly, and some of them with waterfalls, and you just wouldn't know. If you got swept off, you may just fall to your death, right? So anyway, they had to cross these rivers. Now, not only were these rivers dangerous, but they were extremely cold. So every team member that I interviewed said that while they were out there, they felt like they were just going to freeze to death. And then by the time they were done getting to the river, and they made it, then all of a sudden the thought hit them, how many more times will I have to cross these rivers, right? And so all of them talked about how the rivers were like one of the most, I guess, discouraging things that they came across as they were doing it. Of course, as they're out there, they're thinking about the stream power law, right? This equation is used by many scientists to determine the age of a stream or river. It takes into account the rate of erosion, the hardness of the material the stream is flowing through, the size of its drainage area, and the slope of the water flowing. Supposedly, using this equation, scientists can figure out how long a river has been cutting through its riverbed. Okay, we all know the story of how so many rivers have been called millions of years, right? Because when you look at the rate of erosion and use the stream power law, it winds itself back to being very, very long periods of time. But there at Novarupta, that's not the case, right? Is you see these rivers that have already carved very deeply, right? In fact, Dr. Robert Griggs discovered that the river Lethe, which is this one, had cut 100 feet through canyons in 5 years. 100 feet in 5 years, right? So you've got the initial eruption, you've got the initial catastrophe carving the canyon, and then you've got it carving through another 100 feet in 5 years. That's a rate of 20 feet per year. However, when Dr. Shorman showed up, that rate was much less, right? So if you've got a uniformitarianist who shows up and looks at the current rate of erosion, they would wind it back and say that those canyons actually took a much longer time to form, and yet we know that a catastrophe did that very quickly. In fact, as you guys already know, oftentimes they say river carves canyon, but in reality, catastrophe carves canyon, and then river takes path of least resistance, right? So that's exactly what they discovered while they were up there at Novarupta. Okay, now I forgot to tell you that Kenny and Dr. Shorman actually have superpowers. They're incredibly strong. Oh, I'm just kidding. Yeah, it's just pumice, so you can see what that's like. I told you that both Griggs' team and also their team had to fight pumice storms. Here's what that looks like. Hang on. Now they told me that this one was weak enough that they could actually shoot video, right? Because they wanted to show people what it looks like. But they said that a lot of them that they faced were much stronger than that. Here's what they said, is that they would be hiking. Matter of fact, you're going through pumice, right? Matter of fact, most of the explorers that I interviewed about it said it's like walking the beach every day. So they're walking through the pumice, right? And all of a sudden, they would hear a noise that sounds like a freight train come barreling down through the canyon. And they said that they had about 5 minutes after they heard the freight train coming, because the winds would be so strong that they would just have to fall flat on their face. They would cover themselves and all their exposed skin and anything that they didn't want ripped up, and they just had to lay there until the pumice went by, and then they would get up and they would start trudging through the pumice again until they heard 5 minutes later the next freight train coming down the canyon. So they said that that's what it was like that day trying to get to the canyons. Okay, you ready to getting to the cabins. Okay, you guys ready to see what beautiful cabins they were in? Yeah. That's actually Kenny in the cabin there. Here's what they look like on the inside. Okay, meanwhile, while Kenny and Dr. Shorman were at the cabins, the other team was back at the Buttress mountain range spending their first night, because remember, they were a day behind. So Tommy said that night that the wind was whipping so strongly that he felt like the tent was just going to be carried into the air. And so he just kept praying, "Dear Lord, please don't let us blow down the canyon like what happened to Dr. Griggs." And he said he didn't sleep a bit that night because they were just afraid that they were going to get swept down the canyon. But obviously they didn't, and so they spent the first night as they were there. So that next night, Dr. Shorman and Kenny spent the night in those little cabins. I don't know why I keep calling them canyons. The next morning they woke up and the weather was starting to look a little bit iffy. And Dr. Shorman, instead of waiting for the rest of the team, decided that it was time right away to try and get out to Novarupta because he didn't want weather to ruin it, because he had heard that weather keeps you from actually getting to Novarupta. And so he and Kenny woke up very early the next day and they headed to Novarupta. And so here you can see them actually arriving at the dome itself. So there's Kenny. You can see what here's what the dome of Novarupta looked like. Not very impressive as a volcano, right? You want to kind of see the big old, but that's what Novarupta looked like. Okay, so while they were there, Dr. Shorman was very familiar with Dr. Austin's project where he pulled a rock from the lava dome at Mount Saint Helens and had it dated. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And it dated to 240,000 for some components. The whole rock was, the whole rock was 240,000. One of the pieces of rock dated to 2.8 million years old. So Dr. Shorman wanted to repeat that, so he actually grabbed a sample of the dome there, and he took it 100 years later, exactly 100 years later, after the dome had formed, and he took it to the New Mexico why can't I not say that? Geochronological Research Lab, and he had it dated with the argon method. So the actual age of the rock, 100 years, almost to the day of the eruption. The actual date that came back from the lab, 5.5 million years old. Wow. By the way, as you guys know, since you guys all do creation ministry, you can go to place after place and find out when rocks were actually created and have them dated, and it comes up long all of the time, right? Dr. Dan Biddle, one of my friends who is responsible for some of the videos that you guys have got in your museum there, Dr. Biddle likes to buy a bunch of dinosaur material. He's got a garage full of dinosaur material, all right? And it's amazing. He gives it out to creation ministries all the time. So the guy that he buys the dinosaur material from is an evolutionist. And so one time he's on the phone with the evolutionist and he's buying more dinosaur stuff, and the guy goes, "So you're like this young earth creationist, right?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I don't know how you can believe that dinosaur fossils are only thousands of years old." I'm sorry, that was another conversation. "I don't know how you can believe that rocks are only thousands of years old." He goes, "Right now behind me, behind my desk, I've got hundreds of books that all talk about radioisotope dating and all the rocks that have ever been dated and all the dates that we've gotten from these rocks." And Dr. Biddle's kind of praying about what to say about it. And finally, all of a sudden, he gets this question. He goes, "Hey, out of all those books that are on your shelves," he goes, "is there one where we took a rock of historically known age and it dated correctly?" And the guy goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I mean, a lot of times we've dated rocks that we know how old they are. Is there any example of one that has turned out correctly?" And the guy said, "I've never thought about that before." Wow. You know, since then, I've asked a lot of, probably like you have, a lot of evolutionists, give me a case when we know a rock of known age has turned out to be the right date. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten a guess, but I've never heard of an example of that. And that's what happened at Novarupta, is when he dated the dome, it was 100 years old, and it turned out to be 5.5 million years old. So it's just example after example like that, right? All right, so after getting a sample, they came back to the cabins. Meanwhile, the other team was finally arriving, and they finally got to meet together, the whole team together at the cabins. There you see a picture of them, out there in the cabins. They spent the night there. The next day, the weather was still good, so they decided to go back to Novarupta. And there's a better picture of Novarupta. You get kind of a picture of what the vent actually looks like. You see the lava dome, and you get to see the vent itself. So the question is, what exactly happened here on June 6th through June 8th of 1912? And basically the eruption took place in 60 hours, which have been divided up into 5 different episodes. So the first thing that happened is here is Mount Katmai, which is 6 miles away from Novarupta, and this was the actual volcano. And the actual volcano is what began erupting, because that's what volcanoes do. Here, forgot some information. So it was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon of June 6, 1912, that it began erupting. But underneath Mount Katmai was a reservoir of magma chambers. And basically what happened is under extreme pressure, all of a sudden it backed up, okay? And well, actually what happened was the volcano began to eat away at itself, and it began to collapse. And as it collapsed down and in on itself, it plugged up its own vent, and then that backed it up, and then it shot out 6 miles away, and that's what created Novarupta, all right? So Novarupta was like this vent that just formed as a result of the backup. So that's why it doesn't look much like a volcano, right? Is because it wasn't. It was just where the material shot out. So basically what happened, by the way, is as the material is coming out, you've got this very hot material as Mount Katmai is starting to erupt. You've got all these glaciers on top, and all of a sudden these glaciers flash into supercritical water, which eats away at rock, right? I mean, the properties of supercritical water can eat through rock with no problem, and so it starts eating away at the top of the mountain, and that's what causes it to drop into itself, and then it backs up the system, and then it begins to shoot out of Novarupta. Katmai continued to erupt a little bit, but most of the material came out of Novarupta. We're going to pass by that. Okay, so here's some of the animation that we have done for the documentary. This is just in its really rough state. You know how when you do animations, you start off with real simple like line drawings, and then they keep getting more and more detailed. So this is still kind of in the rough state, but just a chance for you to see it. There's the collapse of Mount Katmai. And you can see that 6 miles away, you can see Novarupta is erupting. So that's kind of Dr. David Shorman is working in conjunction with our animator because we're having so much fun. Nobody has ever created animations about what actually took place at the volcano. And so Dr. Shorman, based on all the research that he's done and all the data that he's collected from other people, we're actually trying to make a correct animation of what took place when it happened there. Okay, so I told you 5 episodes. Episode number 1. Episode 1 lasted for 16 hours and accounted for 70% of the material that would be ejected. Okay? During this episode, it deposited 9 distinct deposits filling the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. There were flows moving at speeds of 450 miles an hour. It began with rhyolite material and eventually released dacite. It was about 6 hours into this episode when Mount Katmai collapsed, so that's when the collapse happened, releasing mud flows, ash, and hydrothermal rock matrix. During the first 11 hours of the eruption, there was 567 tons of material ejected from Novarupta's vent every second. So one of the animations we have that I didn't include in my PowerPoint here is for size. We have that amount of material coming out in this huge cube of magma, and then we compare it to New York City, and New York City is dwarfed by this cube of magma that's coming out. So that would be actually in the documentary when we're done. At the end of episode 1, there was a short pause of a few hours. During this episode, it deposited 9 distinct deposits filling the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. There were flows moving at speeds of 450 miles an hour. It began with rhyolite material, folks. I just read that. That's a duplicate slide. I'm so sorry. Episode number 2. Episode 2 is a Plinian eruption, right? Erupting up into the air, shooting gas and dacite material high up into the air. Although there were earthquakes throughout the entire eruption, the largest took place during episode number 2, hitting 7.0 on the Richter scale. It blew out almost 3 cubic miles of material, which covered an area of 3,000 square miles. Okay, so that's what's going on. This event also caused pyroclastic density currents, waves of fast-moving gas carrying rock that shot down at high speeds downward, depositing layer after layer. You guys know how pyroclastic flow works, right? is you've got gas that just comes barreling down the mountain. It's carrying a bunch of material. As it's shooting down, it starts to lose energy. As the gas begins to dissipate, the material starts to skip along the ground. So it's just surge after surge after surge, just layer after layer being deposited. So that's what was going on during episode number 2. Episode number 3, after a short break, episode 3 shot another 6/10 of a cubic mile of material straight up into the air to fall back, creating even more layers. It also shot out more waves of gas and material. So that's basically what was going on during episode number 3. It also ended as the material built up around Novarupta's vent, forming a dome that plugged the volcano. And so it stopped for just a minute. Episode number 4 blew out the plug, and it started erupting again, depositing even more material around the vent. And then finally, episode number 5 was another dome building event, which replaced the old dome, and then this dome sealed it off, and the eruption actually ended at that point. So those are the 5 episodes of the eruption that took place at the Novarupta. We've already talked about that, the water. But when you think about it, Genesis 7:11, creationists love this, right? In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 7th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were open. So we all talk about what was going on with those great events that were opened up, those fountains of the great deep, right? And at Novarupta, like many volcanic eruptions, one of the main components coming out is water, right? And so I said with Katmai, when it began erupting, you've got this supercritical water. Here's the information from Dr. Sherman. By the way, the reason I'm reading to you is I want to get the information straight, right? The critical point for water is 705.2 degrees Fahrenheit with a pressure of 3,191 pounds per square inch. At pressures and temperatures like this, water no longer acts like a liquid or a gas, but something in between. Near this critical point, it becomes very corrosive, and it can actually eat through rock. And so Dr. Shorman has determined that that's what actually took place at Mount Katmai when it collapsed in on itself. All right, so after visiting Novarupta, the vent of Novarupta, they hiked the 6 miles to get to Mount Katmai, and that's kind of what they had hoped to do, was climb Mount Katmai. But you can see that the weather started getting really, really bad, and soon it got so thick that they couldn't even see at all. And not only that, but the moisture was getting so bad that their camera was no longer working. And Dr. Shorman was worried that he was going to lose all of the pictures that he had taken. And the other thing was, is since they were so disoriented, they realized that they had to call off climbing Mount Katmai. So the team never got to climb Mount Katmai. You can see them down here at the base, and they were really bummed out. And so they said, we've got to return back to camp. Well, they started heading off back towards their base camp again, only to find out after a couple of hours that they had been heading the wrong direction. And they were totally lost in the wilderness, just kind of wandering around. And so they weren't quite sure where they were at. But eventually the cloud cover began to lift, and when that happened, all of a sudden the camera started working again, and praise God, God allowed them to keep all of the images that they took, and they were able to start making their way back towards the cabins again. Along the way, they came to a place called Baked Mountain, and here you can see part of the team is there on Baked Mountain. Baked Mountain is 3,500 feet high, 1,000 feet above the valley floor. And what did they find on top of Baked Mountain? Hint. What did they find on top of every mountain? Coal lava. They found marine fossils. Yeah, we find them on mountains all around the world, right? And so there they were at Novarupta, right? Which makes sense because 15 cubits upward did the water prevail and the mountains were covered. And so when you think about that, matter of fact, creationists, a lot of them believe that after the flood, after the receding of the waters, that due to plate tectonics, that actually there was uplift of the mountains afterwards, right? And in Psalms we read about how the waters went back to the bounds that God made for them and the uplift of the mountains, right? It seems like scripturally, maybe there's some great support for that. And so we're not surprised when we find marine fossils on different mountains. Okay, from there they spent some of the day just kind of playing and practicing their ice axiom there. All right, so I promised you a little romance, right? So here comes the romance part of it. Kenny had met a girl from Hawaii, and he and her had been dating a lot. In fact, her name was Ashley. And Kenny was thinking that maybe Ashley was the one, okay? And so a lot of times when the group was goofing around, like doing the ice axiom there, Kenny would sneak off, and they just happened to have a satellite phone that was only to be used for emergencies. And so what Kenny was doing was he was sneaking away and using the phone to call Ashley and talk all about their adventures that they had. And so he would call them, and they would talk and talk and talk, and then all of a sudden one day their minutes ran out. And Kenny realized that there was no more minutes left on the phone, and that if anybody got hurt and they tried to use the phone, that there was no way they could use the phone. And so he kept it a secret because he didn't want anybody to know that he had been calling Ashley during the whole trip. And so it wasn't until afterwards they met in a restaurant, a pizza restaurant afterwards, and then he confessed to the guys that he had been using the phone. So anyway, they did some other things that they explored. You can find out more about that in the documentary someday. But basically, after a couple of days of exploring and checking things out, they had to head back again, back out of the wilderness again. So here they are crossing some of the rivers and the deposits that were there. Okay, I'm going to read this stuff because I am not a geologist. I'm a media producer. All right, so I want to get this right. So if you guys don't mind, I'm just going to read through some of this. As they crossed the River Lake, they were surrounded. River Lake. They were surrounded by layers deposited by the eruption. Many of the layers were known as valley-filling ignimbrites. An ignimbrite is the term for when volcanic material like rhyolite is trapped in hot gases as they rapidly flow from an eruption. Rhyolite never forms lava flows like the basaltic flows of Hawaii because it's too sticky. But when hot rhyolite magma dissolves into water and suddenly flashes the steam, the whole mass undergoes an instant explosion like a bomb. This matrix shot out of the vent, forming a ground-hugging slurry of hot gas, vapor, and ash that were flowing at incredible speeds and spread over the incredible distances that we see. In some places along the River Lake, these 9 ignimbrite packages are actually over 100 feet thick. So you can tell how quickly these huge packages of material were laid down. Some of these materials were so hot the particles were actually melted together, which is what we call welded ignimbrite. So that's what some of the material that's there. The other deposits were deposits. They're composed of ash and pumice mainly from Novarupta, but they also include a special deposit called a HEPI deposit, which stands for High Energy Proximal Ignimbrite. HEPIs are part of a pyroclastic density current formed after superheated clouds of gas and ash collapse on themselves and rush across the surrounding valley and mountains. HEPI deposits blanket everything in their path with thin layers that frequently stack up to several feet in thickness. So here we've got these very thin layers that are being created, right? Which can be interpreted as being slowly deposited, right? It's amazing to know that such finely layered deposits can be formed so rapidly. So when you think about it, we've got this catastrophe that's making something that a uniformitarianist would interpret as being something that took a long, long time. So imagine what a worldwide flood would do. So we've got pyroclastic currents that are laying down these layers. But imagine with turbidity currents, we've got something similar. The fluid isn't gas, the fluid is water. But in turbidity currents, you've also got surges of water that are doing that as well. Okay, I think I'm going to skip that for now. Okay, once the guys got back out of the wilderness again, they were back to where all the tourists are at, and they took a tour, a ranger-led tour to a place called Yucca Falls. The Naknek Formation, which you see here, is an interesting formation. It goes all the way from the Alaskan Range in the east, all the way past the Pribilof Islands into the Bering Sea. So this stretches over 1,000 miles, and it's 14,000 feet deep in some places. This deposit is said to be comprised of rapidly eroded coastal sediments mixed with a considerable volume of volcanic debris. So we've got water deposited material that's been mixed with volcanic material. What's that sound like? Worldwide flood, right? So you've got this huge layer called the Naknek Formation that's below the volcanic deposit, and Dr. Shorman has shown that he believes that that was flood deposited, and so really interesting when we look at it. The other thing that we find in the Naknek Formation is we find marine fossils all throughout it. Okay, so we've got this huge water deposited layer mixed with volcanic debris, which we believe the volcanic materials will be going off during the flood, right? So it looks like we've got a great layer that shows the flood. So there you go, there's another shot of the Naknek Formation. Pretty interesting. So the guys eventually headed back home again, and you think this talk is over, but it's not. This is the part in which either I can tell you're hardcore or you're going, oh my goodness, there's more. Because I want to talk to you about the second expedition of Dr. David Shorman. There's no easy way to transition. You guys doing okay?
Yeah.
How far you guys to that? Okay, this one goes by quick, all right? So Dr. Shorman, he got back and he was looking at all the data and going through it all, and he began to realize that he needed to go back and do some more exploring. And this time, the place that he went, people have gone before. Since Dr. Griggs, they've checked it out, but he decided to go to the backside of Novarupta. No human has been there since Dr. Griggs. So he was literally going to be the first person to go to the specific area that he was going to be leading the second expedition. And so basically all of those hours on the cell phone turned out to be well spent, because that summer before their second expedition, he was actually married to Ashley. And so here they are leaving on their second expedition, and who's in the airplane with them? Ashley. Isn't that cool? So the second expedition was in 2011, and it's Dr. Shorman, Ashley, and Kenny, and they're newlyweds. By the way, Ashley had never ever been camping with each other. So this was going to be her first camping trip. So they were flying out to the back side of Novarupta. There you can see them getting in the plane there to fly out. Dr. Shorman's goal on this particular expedition was to establish the biblical record in the rocks. He wanted to show creation, flood, ice age, and then the volcanic eruptions, modern day eruptions. Okay, so that was his goal, was to establish that, because he felt that he was going to be able to establish that particular pattern in the rocks. And they were going to be gone for 4 days this time to do the expedition. Here they are actually flying in. Okay, so they're headed to a place where no human has been since Dr. Griggs. And Dr. Griggs is really the only one who's really seen it, because the whole landscape has been completely wiped, right? There's no GPS data. There's no real maps, okay? And so they're going out to a place really where humans don't know how to get from one place to another. Now, the seaplane pilot knew of the lakes that were there. There's one lake that's called Lake Dakavac and another one called Katmai Lake, okay? Now, their goal was to base themselves out of Katmai Lake, and so they told the pilot that that's where they wanted to fly to. But Katmai Lake is much shorter, and he said, that's a problem, because with all of the weight in the plane, I won't be able to take back off from Katmai Lake, so I need to land at Lake Dakavac. And they said, that's great. They said, how do you get from Lake Dakavac to Katmai? And the guy said, he laughed at him and said, nobody's ever done that before. And so he said, good luck, you're going to have to figure it out, but I'll pick you back up at Lake Dakavac. And they decided 5 o'clock, 4 days from then, that he was going to be picking them up at that lake. And then last minute, as they were coming in, all of a sudden he realized, oh wait, I'm dropping you guys off with all of your equipment. I'll actually be able to take off from Lake Katmai. So I'll drop you off on Lake Katmai, and then I'll pick you up at Lake Dakavac, because with all your equipment and you guys in the plane, I won't be able to take off from Katmai. So they changed last minute to where they were going to drop them off at. So they landed at Lake Katmai. Now, I should tell you that Dr. Shorman had a tracker with him that his wife, who's living in Texas, her and her little daughter actually could pull up online and see where they were traveling. And so what ended up happening is Karen is his wife, and Ellie, his daughter, they knew the agenda of where they were going to be each day, and all of a sudden they noticed that the tracker was in the wrong spot. And so little Ellie mentioned something like, "Mom, what if a bear ate them and swallowed the tracker?" And so they were back home praying that they were okay, right? So they landed at Katmai Lake, and they were going to go out and explore, and one of the places that they explored was Falling Mountain. And here's a little simulation.
Although there were earthquakes throughout the entire eruption, the largest took place during episode 2, hitting 7.
Okay, so I didn't realize that there was a narration to that. This mountain is called Falling Mountain, and basically, I told you that there was 3 different mountains that had fallen during the eruption. So Falling Mountain is one of the ones that fell and caused the landslide that actually blocked the Katmai River, and then, like I explained, that actually breached and actually carved the canyon. So here you can actually see the canyon that's there. Now, the reason this is important is because there's a little bit of a battle going on in the creation movement right now, right, between the guys who say the breach dam theory for Grand Canyon, but then there's also those who want to say that the receding waters of the flood cut the whole canyon, right? You guys have heard from the 2 camps, right, as they're going back and forth. In Dr. Austin's favor, who's kind of heading up the breach dam theory, that's exactly what happened there at Mount Katmai, is that a breach dam cut that canyon very rapidly, and so they got to be there and actually document this canyon that's left over from that. By the way, in preparation for doing the documentary, I talked to Dr. Austin probably 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Austin says, in his own words, that he's going to be providing some pretty hard to overcome evidence for the breach dam theory. So that's going to be released pretty soon in a paper that he and several other guys have been working on. Since I'm an old ICR guy, I kind of lean with the breach dam guys. So could it be that there's a landfill dam that actually blocks up a river, backs up a ton of water, then the natural dam breaks and carves a canyon very quickly? Well, the answer is yes. It happened at Novarupta, right? So, yeah, that's a real possibility, right? So when it comes to the Grand Canyon, maybe that's what took place. Okay, so one of the other things that they discovered while they were out there is they discovered exactly what Dr. Shorman was looking for. Underneath, you see basement rock, right? Probably creation. And then on top of that, you see the Naknek Formation, which flood, right? Flood deposits that we talked about. On top of that, glacial till, what's that from? Ice Age. By the way, they documented all kinds of evidence for the Ice Age, and then on top of that, the modern deposits of Novarupta. And so there you've got the entire biblical history of Earth right there in that one set of layers that's there. And they established that in several different places. Of course, that was his goal. So as they were traveling around, they spent a lot of time investigating that as they were doing their expedition. One of the things that they had hoped to do was to climb Mount Katmai, because remember, on the first expedition, they failed to do that. So now was Dr. Shorman's chance. He was coming from the other side, and he was super excited about that they were finally going to be able to climb Mount Katmai and document stuff and take pictures. But I should mention that, remember Ashley's first camping trip? She didn't know the rule that you buy your boots a long way ahead of time and you wear them. And so the whole time, her boots are just tearing and ripping at her ankles. And they were getting bloody. And when they got to the bottom of Mount Katmai and were about to climb it, once again, the weather was getting bad, that her ankles were just ripped apart. And she just felt like she was in horrible pain. And Kenny said, Ashley, we can't do this. We can't climb the mountain. And she said, no, we can do it. But Kenny, being a good husband, said, honey, we can't do this. So they had to call off climbing Mount Katmai for the second time. So they weren't able to do that. Dr. Shorman went and investigated some glaciers. He did some measurements on some glaciers. He showed through his data something that we know is that creationists believe in one ice age, right? We see that there's only one ice age, but what we've noticed is that glaciers grow, and then they shrink, and then they grow, and then they shrink. Well, uniformitarianist comes and sees that and says that those are the results of different ice ages, right? Whereas the creationist says, no, one ice age. So Dr. Shorman actually established that while he was out there. Meanwhile, Kenny and Ashley decided to leave Mount Katmai and get back to their camp, and they had to cross another
This
river.
is a completely different section of the river than we crossed before.
I know, but look how much narrower it is here. I'm willing to give it a try.
I'll do it. I want to get back to camp and get warm and out of these boots.
Me too. Okay, make sure to use your poles. I don't want you falling into any pits. Okay, let's go together. 1, 2, 3. Oh wow, that's really cold.
I didn't think it was possible, but somehow it's even cooler than last time.
Let's get across fast.
Okay, Ashley. I'm in above my wings. Kid, oh, please, I can't make it across this.
It's so deep, and the current's running too fast. Don't let it wash you downstream. Here, you're on my way. Let's get back to shore.
I feel it. The wind blowing out of me. It's hard to breathe.
Me too, but come on. We can make it back together. Come on, together. We can do this. It's just a little further.
Kenny, I can't feel my legs anymore. You?
No, but don't think about it. We're almost back to shore. Come on, 3 more steps. 2, okay. Up on 2 banks. Oh.
I'm so tired.
Me too. Let's rest for a second, and then we need to find another spot to cross.
So basically they made it back to shore, and then they had to, with their ankles bleeding, them freezing, they had to find a place where they could actually cross the river. They found a place that was much thinner, that they were able to make it across and back to base camp again. And there you can see, I think these are Ashley's boots. And basically what he did was he took out his knife and he cut the tops off of her boots so that she could finish the rest of the trip. So they had spent their days there. They had to meet the seaplane in 2 days, and they realized they needed to make their journey back to Dakavak, right? Well, again, no data, no GPS, no map. They just had to kind of figure out which direction they were going to go. So they headed out to get back to Dakavak Lake, and there you can see them on their way. By the way, these are springs, and since, remember, no human had been there since Dr. Griggs, Dr. Shorman decided to name these springs after his daughter. So there you go, that's Ellie Springs that you see there. As they're hiking along, they're hiking and they're hiking and they're hiking, and they're getting closer and closer to getting out of the pumice again, and then they get into the next problem, which is alder trees. And at first, the alder trees are helping them because as they're starting to go up these hills, these mountains, they're actually grabbing the alders and using them as ropes to pull themselves up, but they've got, the big old backpacks on them. And it was one of those things where you take a step and slide back, and they kept trying to pull their way up, but pretty soon the alder trees were getting so thick that it's almost like they had to push their way through, and it was taking hours and hours just to make it a short distance to get there. And as they're going along, they're going through these alder trees, and it's starting to get dark, and their goal was to make it to Dakavak Lake so that they could wake up in the morning, have a leisurely day, and make it in time for the seaplane, to meet the seaplane. Well, of course, as everything goes, their supplies were starting to run a little bit low, and that night it was starting to get dark, and finally they decided to set up camp. And so they set up camp, and on the top of this mountain there was a stream that was there. Kenny went down to get some water, and he looked up, and there was a bear. Yeah. And so he got his water, and he started running towards camp, and as he was running, the bear was actually chasing after him, and so he was yelling and screaming for Ashley to get the gun. and she was inside the tent trying to load the gun, and meanwhile the bear was there, and Dr. Sherman came out of his tent, and they started banging pots and pans, and Ashley was in there loading the gun, and she wasn't sure if she was going to have to shoot the bear, and finally they made enough noise using the pots and pans and air horn that the bear turned around and ran off. So that was kind of the adventure for that day. They knew the next day they had to make it to Dakaback Lake because the plane was going to be there at 5 o'clock, and if they missed it, he would probably come back, but it wouldn't be for another day. So they had hired him to come back every day until they picked him up. But they knew they had to make it. So they started off again early the next morning. They packed up camp and they started making their way through the alder trees again. And they went for miles and miles and miles over this ridge that they thought was headed towards Lake Dakaback. And they ended up getting to the end of the ridge, and it was a waterfall with a drop off that was way too great for them to so they had to turn around and make all their way all the way back to where they had made camp that night. And then they took off another way, and again they kept meeting waterfalls, and then they would turn and go back, and finally they found a stream that they felt like was the stream that was headed into Dakaback Lake. And sure enough, they made it down to Dakaback Lake, and they made it just in time, of course, for the seaplane to come. Perfect for doing a documentary, right? Because we get to tell that story. And anyway, they're the three of them are arriving back at Lake Dakaback. They were picked up and flown back and got back home. Dr. Shorman took all of his research and he wrote it up into an ICC paper, if you're familiar with the International Conference on Creationism, peer-reviewed by Dr. Steve Austin and several others. You can actually find, well, I was going to have some copies for you. Of his ICC paper. He published all of his data that he's done, and he presented at the conference, I believe, and then since then, nobody's really talked about it too much. And so we're hoping that with this documentary, that we'll actually be able to get the word out about his expeditions. So what did the expedition do for these guys? I'll let you hear it straight from there.
I think if others would have had the same experience as we did in Novarupta, I think that it would strengthen their relationship with God as far as being able to be out in creation and see His power and see that the evidence of what He says really is true, and that just there's something about being out there that I think you put a lot of trust in Him, and it really draws you closer to Him.
Yeah, I think after hiking through Novarupta, things that I've learned that'll help me in the future is have patience and to just trust yourself and trust God and know that He's in control, and that you don't worry about the little, to trust that it will all work out and we'll all be okay.
I think it's important for Christians to know about Novarupta because it's a great example of the power of God. And we read in Matthew 22:29, Jesus told the Sadducees, He told them they were in error because they did not know Scripture very well and they did not know the power of God. And so, we need to study Scripture, but we also need to study His creation and get to know Him better that way. And so it's just an incredible testimony. The biggest eruption in over 100 years now, and there's just so much power that goes with an event like that, and that can only be possible by a more powerful being in charge of all of that.
So there you go, the journey to Novarupta. I'll tell you very quickly about the production, and then we've got just a few more minutes, and then I'll pray, and I think we're okay with that. So, hey, when Dr. Shorman first came to us, we were working with a bunch of homeschoolers, and we thought, wouldn't this be fun if the homeschoolers themselves made this movie? And so one of the things that we said is we've got to go out into a volcanic area and recreate some of the scenes of Dr. Griggs being out in the wilderness and that type of stuff. So it was kind of cool. Katie came in and Dr. Shorman came in, and we met in a place in California called Alaskan Volcanic National Park. And it was so cool. When Dr. Shorman first got there, he said, Pat, I can't believe how much this looks like Novarupta. And so it was kind of cool because we got to go out there, and the homeschoolers got to use the cameras, and some of them were doing audio, and we had all these props that we had set up and all that type of stuff. Were we up there for 5 or 7 days or something like that? Almost a week, right? But we were out there, and it was so cool. We had some experienced videographers who were teaching the kids how to use the cameras and that type of stuff. And we had kids that were helping to write scripts and all of that type of stuff. And then, like I mentioned, we lost intellectual property for a little while, and then more time went by and more things happened, and pretty soon I travel around and talk about Novarupta to groups, and I would always say, we're making a documentary. I've been doing that for a decade. And so it's really kind of exciting that we're almost across the finish line. Most of the young homeschoolers that worked on that project are now grown up. What's that? Yeah, isn't that amazing? And so we're super excited about this. Our prayer is that this documentary will actually change lives. As you guys know, the information about Mount Saint Helens has changed so many lives over so many years. We're hoping that God will somehow use this as a tool to change lives as well. And so we're pretty excited about it. So hopefully, again, it will be released soon. The first public screening of the documentary will be March 16th. And that we're going to get people's input, and then we're going to make final changes, and then we're going to release it. So we're pretty excited about it. So, any questions, thoughts, comments?
You said that it was 30 times bigger than Mount Saint Helens.
That's cool.
Do you have a visual? I'm a visual person.
Yes.
I mean, I can tell.
You're asking if I have one now.
Is that going to be part of the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. We've got all kinds of visuals to show.
Because I mentioned I went out west, and you just don't realize how massive.
Yes.
You can. I mean, and looking at the mountain with the lake in it was the Mount. Yeah.
Yes. Mount Katmai.
How big is that? I mean, is it a mile across? Is it a quarter mile across? Is it?
I don't know what the actual cross would be. I'm sorry, I don't.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Know that. Yeah, but it was a large volcanic mountain.
Because it's hard to see.
Yeah,
how massive.
Yes.
30 times bigger than Mount Saint Helens is.
Right. Yeah. No, we've got some diagrams and stuff in the documentary where you'll be able to see that.
And the eruption is not necessarily.
Yeah, and the amount of material that came out. Yes.
Yeah.
The amount of material that came out.
That's
30 times larger than Mount Saint Helens. But in fact, it's the largest volcano in modern times. Novarupta is. So in the documentary, we have a scale where we show blocks of material that came out of the different volcanoes. And so you can see the different volcanoes through history. And then you've got Novarupta, and then you've got Mount Saint Helens. So, yeah, but we do that for science. Okay, guys, you've been very patient. Thank you so much for letting me tell you the story.
What's the reason this is kind of flown under the radar? Is it because of the type of eruption it was, where it wasn't actually the majority of the material actually didn't come from the volcano itself, but it came from like a lateral flow and erupted? And is that why it's sort of?
Well, okay, so in the secular world, Novarupta is pretty well known, right? So it's a very well-known volcano. In the creationist circle, I think it's because Dr. Shorman went and he did all of his research. He published his ICC paper, and then he entrusted somebody to come up with a documentary soon. And I think literally the word just didn't get out, right, about his expeditions. And so I'm praying that all these years later, maybe the word will get out.
Plus, it's a remote location. We've got Mount Saint Helens, which everybody can go to see. They've all heard about it. There's been movies made out about it. It happened in some people's lifetimes where all the people there are gone. And it's in a remote location. It's out in Alaska.
Well, you've got Dr. Austin too, who was out talking about Mount Saint Helens all the time. Dr. Austin was traveling all around the country talking about Mount Saint Helens and creationist books and videos. And they're doing Mount Saint Helens talks and all of that, right? Whereas Dr. Shorman hasn't. He's been busy doing other things. So.
Didn't people die in Mount Saint Helens?
Yes.
I think some doctors.
Yeah, and this was so remote that you didn't have to.
Yeah, so that always caused.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, should we pray and close? Make sure you're on the list. If you're on the list with your email, and I can read your email, please. Some people's emails, and I come to say, what is that? If I can read your email, What I'll do is, once this is done, I'll try and send you a link to where you can download it. How does that sound? It's awesome. You guys are literally kind of the first audience to see some of our animations and stuff that you're doing. So I want to thank you by providing you guys with a free digital copy of it. So, all right.